The ballroom of the Whitmore Grand smelled like old money and fresh betrayal. Tara Voss stood at the edge of the marble floor in a dress she'd spent 3 months saving for, a deep burgundy wrap that her best friend had called genuinely stunning, and that her ex-fiancé's mother had, within 30 seconds of seeing her, described as ambitious. The chandeliers threw gold light across 200 people who had known Tara's name for years, but had never once bothered to learn anything else about her. She had been brought here as a guest of honor. That was the phrase Derek Aldrich had used when he'd called her 8 days ago. Guest of honor. He'd said it warmly, the way people say things they don't mean but want you to believe they do. Tara had agreed to come because she thought it was finally over. The 3 years of being his quiet secret, his complicated situation, his woman he kept in a separate compartment from the life he actually lived. She understood now, standing at the edge of the room, with a glass of champagne she hadn't touched, that she had been brought here for a very different reason. Derek Aldrich, heir to the Aldrich Group's $17 billion real estate empire, had chosen tonight to announce his engagement to someone who was not Tara. She heard it the way you hear bad news in a dream, slightly delayed, slightly muffled, the meaning arriving a full second after the sound. Derek was at the microphone at the center of the room, his jaw sharp under the light, his voice carrying the particular confidence of a man who had never once doubted his own right to take up space. Beside him stood a woman named Priscilla Vane, 26, collarbone like a coat hanger, smile like a press release. "She's everything I've ever wanted," Derek said into the microphone, and 200 people lifted their glasses, and Tara felt the champagne flute begin to slip from her fingers. She caught it. She always caught things. That was the problem with being the most competent person in any room. You were expected to hold everything together, including yourself, including the moments when someone was publicly dismantling every quiet promise they'd ever made to you. Tara set her glass on a passing waiter's tray and turned to leave. She was not going to cry here. She was not going to make a scene. She was not going to give anyone in this room the satisfaction of watching Tara Mosely. The girl Derek's mother had once called a sweet, big-hearted girl, with exactly the kind of smile that meant she was too fat, too ordinary, too much, fall apart in a borrowed dress in a ballroom she didn't belong in. She made it to the coat check. She made it through the lobby. She made it to the revolving door before someone said her name. Not Derek. The voice was wrong for Derek, lower, quieter, and carrying none of the performed warmth Derek used on people he needed something from. This voice was the kind that didn't need to perform anything. It simply was. Mrs. Mosely. She turned. The man standing 6 feet away was not someone she recognized from the party. He was tall, not aggressively so, but enough that she'd have noticed him in the room if she hadn't been focused on not collapsing. Dark suit, no tie, collar open exactly 1 button. Dark hair with a little gray at the temples that he clearly didn't bother to address. He was looking at her with an expression that wasn't pity and wasn't curiosity. It was something more unsettling than either. It was attention, real attention, the kind that sees. "I don't think we've met," Tara said. "We haven't." He didn't offer his hand immediately. "My name is Calder Royce." She knew the name the way everyone in this industry knew it, abstractly, distantly, the way you know a weather pattern before it reaches your city. Calder Royce didn't attend events like this. Calder Royce was the kind of man other men in that ballroom talked about in the past tense when hoping for the future. "We had a meeting with Royce's people. We're in talks with the Royce Group." Royce passed, unfortunately. He built things and demolished things, and occasionally did both to the same structure within the same fiscal year, and he answered to no one that anyone could name. He was also, by most accounts, frightening, not in a loud way. In the way of very cold water, the danger wasn't visible until you were already in it. "What do you want?" Tara asked, because she was too tired for pleasantries and too smart for pretense. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, an acknowledgement. "I have a proposal for you," he said. "Not tonight. Tonight you should go home." He reached into his jacket and produced a card, plain white, just a number, and held it out to her. "Call me tomorrow if you're interested in a conversation." "About what?" "About the fact that you spent 3 years doing Derek Aldrich's financial restructuring for him while he kept you quiet, and that everything his company is about to announce in the next quarter is built on your work." He paused. "And about the fact that I could use someone who thinks the way you do." Tara looked at the card. She looked at him. "You've been watching me," she said. "For about 8 months," he said, without apology or embarrassment, which was somehow more alarming than either would have been. She took the card. She went home. She did not sleep. The Royce Group occupied the top 4 floors of a building in Midtown that had no signage on the exterior, just a street number and a doorman who looked like he'd seen everything and chosen neutrality as a life philosophy. Tara arrived at 9 the next morning in the best blazer she owned, the one she wore when she needed to feel like herself, and not like the version of herself other people expected. Calder Royce's office was not what she'd anticipated. She'd expected the performance of power, the oversized desk, the city view staged like a backdrop, the chair slightly higher than the one across from it. What she got was a room that looked like someone actually worked in it. Papers in organized clusters, 2 monitors, a whiteboard covered in numbers she recognized as yield projections, and a round table in the corner that suggested he preferred conversations to audiences. He was already standing when she came in. "You did your homework last night," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," she said. "You're not in real estate." "I am tangentially. You're in the business of acquiring things other people have damaged and returning them to function." She sat down without being invited to, which she suspected was a small test she'd just passed. "The Aldrich Group is going to announce a development deal in 3 weeks that I know from the inside is built on fraudulent zoning projections. You want to know how exposed they are before you decide whether to move against them or pick up the pieces after." He sat across from her. "And you're willing to tell me," he said. "I'm willing to consult," she said. "Properly, contracted, compensated." She met his eyes. "I'm not a gift, Mr. Royce. I'm not offering you anything for free." "I know," he said. "And then that's exactly why I'm interested." The conversation lasted 4 hours. She'd expected one. She'd brought notes she didn't need because the problem she'd been sitting inside for 3 years was so fully mapped in her mind that she could describe it from any angle, any altitude, any entry point. He asked questions that were precise and occasionally unexpected. Not the questions of a man verifying what he already knew, but of one genuinely trying to understand something. He didn't condescend. He didn't soften his language for her. He argued back twice, and both times she held her ground, and both times he went quiet in a way that seemed like recalibration rather than retreat. When it was over, he walked her to the elevator. "I want to make a different proposal," he said, "different from consulting." She turned. "I need someone in a particular position for the next 6 months," he said, "not an employee, something more visible. My company is in a negotiation with a European partnership group that values, somewhat archaically, the perception of personal stability in its executive counterparts." He said this without evident discomfort. "They want to know I have stakes beyond my portfolio." Tara waited. "I'm asking you to appear for 6 months as my partner, publicly, events, dinners, the things that require a second person." He paused. "You would be compensated. You would retain full independence. Nothing would be asked of you that you don't expressly agree to. At the end of 6 months, we conclude the arrangement, professionally and cleanly." The elevator arrived. She didn't step into it. "That's the strangest job offer I've ever received," she said. "I don't imagine you've received many conventional ones." "I haven't," she agreed. She studied him for a moment. "You're asking me to perform a relationship for business purposes, yes? Why me?" He looked at her for a long moment. Not the kind of look that evaluates surface, but the kind that's been looking for a while and has already settled something. "Because you're the most capable person I've watched operate in the last year," he said. "And because you are, at this moment, precisely positioned to make every person in that ballroom last night deeply regret the assumptions they made about you." He tilted his head slightly. I thought you might find that useful. She stepped back from the elevator. I'll want the contract reviewed by my own attorney, she said. Of course. And I want full discretion over my own schedule. I'm not available as a social prop. I'm not offering you a position as a prop, he said, and something in his tone had changed, not softer, but more direct, as if he'd put something down he'd been carrying. I'm offering you a partnership. The terms are yours to define. She looked at him for another moment. I'll call you by Thursday, she said. She called him Wednesday. The first event was a donor dinner at the Hargrove Museum, the kind of old money gathering where the flower arrangements cost more than most people's monthly rent, and the conversations were elaborate dances around who needed what from whom. Tara wore a dress she'd chosen herself, deep navy, structured at the shoulder, cut to make clear that she was a woman who had decided exactly how much space she intended to take up. She'd anticipated whispers. She'd prepared for them. What she hadn't prepared for was Calder Royce appearing at her side within 30 seconds of her arrival. Not ostentatiously, not with the performance of a man claiming territory, but with the quiet and absolute manner of someone for whom her presence was simply the most natural place to be. He touched the small of her back to guide her through a conversation cluster, and the touch was brief and impersonal, and somehow, in its very neutrality, made 3 women across the room narrow their eyes in the particular way that meant they'd already decided she was interesting. The European partners were there, a husband and wife team named the Sørensens, who were Danish and precise and had a combined sense of humor that was exactly as dry as Tara suspected the North Atlantic. She liked them immediately, which was inconvenient because she was supposed to be performing. Except she wasn't performing. She was just herself. She talked about the structural inefficiencies she'd identified in a coastal development model they mentioned. She asked Erik Sørensen about the financing vehicle he'd used on a Stockholm project she'd read about. She and Linnea Sørensen spent 15 minutes at the edge of the room discussing zoning law in 3 different countries with the mutual enthusiasm of people who have found their obscure specialty mirrored in another person. When the evening ended, and she and Calder were in the car, he turned to look at her. They asked me, he said, if you were actually in the industry or just married into it. What did you tell them? I told them you were the person who would be leading the risk assessment on the Aldrich exposure project. You told them the truth, I usually do, he said. He was quiet for a moment. You didn't need to perform anything tonight. No, she said, I didn't. Another silence, comfortable unexpectedly. The Sørensens want to have dinner next week, he said. The 4 of us, informally. I know, she said. Linnea already texted me. He looked at her again, that look that had no performance in it, that simply and directly saw. All right, he said. They were quiet the rest of the way. 3 weeks into the arrangement, the Aldrich group made its announcement. Tara was in Calder's conference room when it broke. 7 of his people around the table, 1 of his attorneys on a screen, and Tara at the whiteboard demonstrating exactly where the zoning projections deviated from recorded precedent and by how much. The number she wrote was not small. His CFO, a compact woman named who had spent the first 2 meetings clearly deciding whether to trust Tara, leaned back in her chair and said quietly, "How did you know?" "Because I built the original model," Tara said. And then I watched someone alter it. No one in the room said anything for a moment. The resulting position Calder's firm took was not aggressive. It was surgical. It did not attempt to destroy the Aldrich Group. It simply made sure that when the announcement collapsed under its own fraudulent weight, which it did 11 days later, the Royce Group was already positioned to acquire what remained of the most valuable component. A waterfront parcel in Brooklyn that had been the actual prize the whole time. Derek Aldrich's name was in the financial press for 2 weeks after that, not flatteringly. Tara was in a breakfast meeting with the Sørensens on the morning of the first story. She did not mention Derek. She did not need to. It was sometime in the 5th week that things became complicated. Not loudly. The complication was quiet. the kind that accumulates in the peripheral vision before it becomes unavoidable. It was the way Calder always had coffee ready when she arrived, without being asked, because he'd noticed after the second meeting that she took it a particular way. It was the way he remembered, without notes, the details of conversations she'd had weeks ago, and referenced them precisely when they became relevant. It was the way he disagreed with her in meetings without any performance of authority, treating her objections as the serious structural concerns they were. And it was the way he looked at her sometimes when she was talking. Not when she finished, but while she was still mid-sentence, while she was figuring out something out loud, with an expression she couldn't quite name because it wasn't attraction in any performed sense. It was more like someone watching something they'd been looking for and finding it where they expected, but with a relief they hadn't anticipated. She told herself it was the arrangement. She told herself he was a thorough person who applied the same attention to everything. She told herself a number of things that she didn't entirely believe. The moment of clarity came at an event she hadn't anticipated mattering. It was a smaller gathering, a cocktail reception for a firm Calder was considering partnering with. Low stakes, professionally, but a woman named Priscilla Vane was there, because Priscilla's family had interests that overlapped with the firm, and Priscilla was Derek Aldrich's newly public fiancée, and she arrived with Derek on her arm, looking like a magazine spread, and looking at Tara with the specific expression of someone who wants to establish a hierarchy quickly. "Oh," Priscilla said, approaching with a smile that had more edges than warmth. "Tara, I didn't know you were in Calder Royce's circle." She let the pause sit for exactly a second too long. "He's very selective. He is," Tara agreed. "I'm sure you're very useful to him," Priscilla said, and managed to make useful sound like a category below what she considered significant. Derek, to his credit, looked mildly uncomfortable. Not enough to say anything. "She is," said a voice beside Tara, and Calder was there, not from across the room, not hurrying over. Simply there, as if he'd been there the whole time and the conversation had only just noticed him. He looked at Priscilla with the calm of someone watching a minor weather event. "She's the reason we outpaced your fiancé's firm by about $60 million last quarter." He said it pleasantly, not loudly, just clearly. "You should ask him about the Brooklyn parcel sometime. I'm sure he'd love to explain it." Priscilla had nothing to say to that. Derek looked at Tara. For a moment, something passed through his expression. Not apology, exactly, but the nearest thing to it she'd ever seen from him, and it arrived 3 years and one very public evening too late. Tara gave him a smile that was genuine and contained and meant absolutely nothing. They left early. In the car, Tara didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know," he said. "I could have handled it myself." "I know that too," he said. "I wasn't doing it because you couldn't. I was doing it because I wanted to." She looked at him. He was looking out the window, which was not his usual directness, and she realized with a quiet shock that he was actually uncertain, that behind the absolute exterior was a man trying to find the honest way to say something and not quite finding the door. "Calder," she said. He looked at her. "What are we actually doing?" she asked. The car was quiet. The city moved past the windows. "I think," he said slowly, "we have been doing something other than the contract for at least 3 weeks. "Maybe 4, she said. "Maybe 4, he agreed. She looked at him for a long moment. He looked back without flinching, without performing, without the armor she'd seen him wear in every room she'd watched him occupy before this one. "I want to renegotiate the terms," she said. "Tell me what you want," he said. "I want this to be real," she said. "Not a performance. Not useful. Real. Which means slow. Which means I decide the pace and you don't push, and if that's not something you can agree to, then we keep it professional, and I walk out of this car in 6 weeks and we part well." He was quiet for a beat. She counted it. "Slow," he said. "Your pace." He paused. "I can agree to that, and Calder." She waited until he was looking at her. "I need you to understand that what you see is what there is. I'm not a project. I'm not a before and after. You don't get to decide what I become. "I know what you are," he said, and the simplicity of it, the absence of qualifications, sat in the car between them like something solid. Outside, the city went on, indifferent, luminous, enormous, and unhearing, and for the first time in longer than she could account for, Tara felt something she hadn't let herself feel in a long time, not saved, not rescued, not someone's project, or someone's complication, or someone's quiet secret kept in a separate compartment, like herself. Wholly, in the presence of someone who had looked at the whole of her and found the looking worthwhile. The contract ended, technically, 6 weeks after that night. No one mentioned it. The Sorensen partnership closed in February, and Linnea sent flowers with a note that said I told Eric she was the real reason this worked. The Aldrich Group was restructured under new management after Derek stepped down, amid the continued fallout of the Brooklyn debacle, the details of which were covered in the kind of thorough, accurate financial journalism that Tara had quietly made sure one particular reporter had access to. Priscilla Vane, by several accounts, had relocated to a condo in Miami and was reportedly very happy, which Tara genuinely hoped was true. There was a morning in early spring when Tara was sitting at the round table in Calder's office, her laptop open, his whiteboard covered in numbers, 2 coffees on the table between them, and she realized that she had stopped thinking of it as his office some weeks ago. She had stopped thinking of a lot of things as his. Calder looked up from what he was reading and found her looking at him, and the almost smile that had taken her 2 months to learn how to read crossed his face. "What?" he said. "Nothing," she said. And then, because she had spent 3 years being someone's quiet secret and was done with smallness in all its forms, "Actually, I was thinking that I'm happy." He set down the paper. "Good," he said, in the way that meant more than the word. She looked at the city through the window, massive, indifferent, full of rooms where people made quiet calculations about what other people were worth based on the surface of things, full of ballrooms and chandeliers and whispered venom and champagne flutes, and moments where someone stands at the edge of a marble floor in a dress they'd saved 3 months for and learns, in the most public possible way, what they were to someone, what she had been to Derek, what she had become to herself afterward, what she was now, not despite the humiliation of that night, but because she had walked through it and out the other side and refused to make herself smaller in its wake. Outside, spring was arriving the way it always does in New York, reluctantly, then all at once, and Tara Mosely turned back to her laptop, and the city went on, and she took up every inch of the space that was hers.